Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. I would like to welcome you to our webinar series titled SPHERE Award Fridays. Today, we'll be going over data ownership. My name is George Nikonarov, and I will be the moderator for you today. During today's presentation, we encourage you to send us your questions on the topic, as they will be answered sequentially at the end. You can send us your questions by clicking on the Questions tab in the box in the right-hand corner. We have an exciting and engaging presentation planned for you today. But before we jump into the topic, first up, I would like to introduce Gabrielle Zaccaro, Account Manager with SPHERE Technology Solutions. Gabrielle?
Thanks, George. As George mentioned, my name is Gabrielle Zaccaro, and I'm an Account Manager here at SPHERE in the Sales Department. I'd like to share with you a brief introduction to SPHERE Technology Solutions so that you'll know who we are, what we do, and how we enable our clients to succeed. SPHERE Technology Solutions is an award-winning cybersecurity company. We focus on your data with a heavy emphasis on your most sensitive data. To protect it, we find it, secure it, and provide all the mechanisms to manage data security long-term. We work with the largest and most complex firms in the world, which has allowed us to grow over 600% during the last 4 years. We solve our clients' complex cybersecurity challenges by providing the analytics that measure risk, executing on remediation programs to reduce that risk, and deploying automation solutions to effectively manage risk. This serves to align the people, processes, and technology which enable the desired governance model to maintain security and compliance. We can begin to view this infographic by focusing on the 3 inner circles: data, systems, and access. These circles represent a typical information technology landscape when viewed from a high level. Data. This is the information all companies create and use each day in the operation of their business. We like to call this unstructured or human-generated data. The systems is where the data lives. Systems can be on-prem, off-premise, or in the cloud. Most often, it's a combination of all 3. And access is where the data and systems must be accessed by employees in order for them to do their jobs. This access must consider the varying needs of a wide range of workers, from the frontline employee to the middle manager, all the way up to the C-suite. Additionally, there are access requirements for non-employees, such as business partners, customers, and vendors. From a purely operational perspective, the task of managing these core components is quite complicated. However, one must also consider the outer rings of security, governance, and compliance. Security is what are the threats an organization must defend against? Are these threats internal, external, or both? Compliance. What are those regulations that apply to your specific industry, and how do you abide by these regulations? Most of us have heard of Dodd-Frank, HIPAA, Sarbanes-Oxley, New York DFS, and PCI. SPHERE is an expert in helping our clients meet their compliance objectives. And lastly, governance. What is that target operating model for data, systems, and access? And how does the target operating model enforce security, prove compliance, and how is the model maintained? On this slide, I'm going to talk briefly about how we do what we do. So on the left-hand side, you can see that SPHERE identifies security and compliance concerns, remediates these risks, and creates the governance model to prevent a return of the challenges by first collecting and analyzing the metadata from all of the platforms, tools, and repositories in that target environment. This analysis enables us to produce the key risk indicators, which we call KRIs, which are necessary to establish and maintain the target operating model for your environment. So KRIs are created by applying business intelligence to the collected metadata. There are 3 layers to business intelligence that we talk about. There are industry best practices, SPHERE best practices that we've developed over the years, and last and not least, our customers' business intelligence. These KRIs can then be leveraged in a multitude of ways. They can deliver, as you can see at the bottom of the screen, an assessment. This provides visibility into the extent of issues as a one-time snapshot into the health of your organization. Next, these KRIs can be used to create a risk prioritized plan to remediate the identified risks and enhance those policies and procedures that you use to manage your environment. During the remediation phase, those KRIs become really exciting because we can see that the metrics that measure security and compliance will improve during the execution of remediation. And lastly, let's talk about automation a bit. The automation stage is the governance model that is set in place so that your organization can manage the KRIs and that risk mitigation becomes a business as usual activity. I'd like to share with you briefly some examples of how our clients have benefited from engaging with us. For the first image, for one of our clients, we improved security for them by identifying over 2 million files containing sensitive data, where access didn't follow their firm's accepted standards. This customer engaged Sphere in a remediation effort to lock down access to this data and establish a permissions model based on the principle of least privilege. These measures will help this customer prevent being a victim of the next highly publicized data breach. Next, to mitigate risk for another one of our customers, Sphere conducted an enterprise-wide entitlement review for technology assets, where we certified assets with more than 5,000 owners. We then automated the process so the customer will maintain an accurate book of record. And lastly, for another customer, to improve regulatory compliance, we developed and deployed the controls necessary to enforce information barriers that are required by outside regulators. This customer is no longer subject to audit failures, regulatory actions, and financial penalties. You've likely noticed there are some common themes among these customer success stories. One of the biggest value adds that Sphere brings to the table is we deliver visibility to uncover and measure risk. Sphere understands the identities, ownership, and use cases for the data, systems, and access, and we leverage these metrics to make a positive impact for all of our clients. With that said, I would like to welcome our Director of Architecture and Design, Rosario Mastrogiacomo. Rosario is responsible for the strategy for Sphere's suite of solutions, including being the brains behind Sphereboard. Rosario is an experienced technology executive with over 20 years' experience gained from leading technology teams at several of the world's most prestigious financial services firms, and he'll be leading today's demo. Welcome, Rosario.
Thank you, Gabrielle, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. Great. So today we're going to talk about ownership, particularly unstructured data ownership. So the first question you have to ask when it comes to ownership is, well, what exactly is a data owner? Well, the way that we categorize a data owner or classify a data owner at Sphere is, does the person meet the requirements of being a data owner, and has the individual accepted that they are a data owner? Next, the person who's the data owner has to be someone who's authorized to approve changes that you want to make to the data. And finally, you want to make sure that the person who owns the data may or may not actually be someone who uses the data. In some instances, you may have someone who is authorized to make changes to the data, but isn't necessarily a user of that data. So great. So now we know what a data owner is. The next question is, well, why is it important? Why do we need data owners? Well, finding data owners is the first step in getting to a state where you can clean your environment. So you've gone through, you found all these security issues, you found all these problems where things are not following policies or procedures. You want to correct those issues. To make those corrective actions, you need someone who has the authority to tell you it's okay to do this without introducing a level of risk. The other reason that data ownership is important is that inventory data without ownership is kind of meaningless. In other words, looking at the amount of bits on a hard drive is not as meaningful as knowing that the marketing department is using this data, or the finance department, or equities, or some other, what group or what department within your organization, what group of people are using that data. It's a lot more meaningful than just looking at raw inventory data. And that ownership is really what allows you to do that connection, to put real human beings behind the data that's stored in your environment. So how do you use owners? Well, as I said, owners are the ones that are authorized to tell you that you can make changes. Owners are the ones that can tell you who should or should not have access to a particular data asset, and you leverage that information from them in order to take those corrective actions. But it should be more than that, right? A data owner should not just be someone who every 3 months gets a certification form and has to answer, a question or input data into an Excel sheet or some other tool. Your data owner has to be your partner. They have to understand why you're doing what you're doing. They have to understand that by partnering with you, that what you're asking them to approve or not approve is important in keeping the environment clean and also keeping the environment stable. So great, so now we've determined, so now we know what a data owner is. Let's talk a little bit about how we determine ownership here at Sphere. So at Sphere, we use what we call our multi-tier approach. Basically, what we've discovered over the years is that you can't use a single method to track down who the owner of a data asset is. You have to use multiple methods. And how you use those methods, or which methods you use in that arsenal of methods, depends on the industry that you're looking at. It depends on the individual organization that you're looking at. It could depend on the size of the organization. So we have several different methods that we use in varying ways, and depending on exactly what we know about the organization, we will structure those methods in a particular order. So what I'd like to talk about, what I have on the screen here, are 4 of our most common or our most successful methods. We have a lot more than these. I'd like to talk about just one of them and kind of go over it in details. And the one I'd like to talk about is the majority manager through activity method. Using this method, what we do is first we scan and collect data, and we figure out who's actually using this data. Who are the real people, not accounts, but the real people that are using this data. We then leverage HR data to figure out who is the manager of these people. So let's say that we found 10 people that have access to a particular data set. We look at the majority, who those people report to, and the manager that has the majority of those individuals reporting to them becomes our proposed owner. But notice, and this is a very important step, the last box says, is this proposed owner valid? So very key is figuring out, does this person meet the criteria for ownership? Is their level too high? Is their level too low? Are they consultants? Is their title too high? We use those metrics to determine whether or not this is a valid owner and we can keep them, or we have to throw that out and then either move on to step number 2 or method number 2, or rerun method number 1, but now picking the next best available owner. So great, so we've determined ownership on all your data assets, now what? So today we're here to look at and see a demo of SphereBoard, and what we do once we've determined ownership is bring that data into SphereBoard, and that's how we represent our data. So what I want to do is give a quick overview of SphereBoard so that you have some context in what you're looking at as I click through the screens. So on our landing page, we have our global view. Our global view is where we tell you what's going on in the entire organization. So we have multi tiers of views in SphereBoard, and then different categories or different sections within those tiers. So within the global view, the first thing that we tell you is what you have. That's our inventory cards. Next, we talk about security. What are the security issues? What are the problems that you have in your environment? So we go through some of the security issues in your environment. And finally, risk rating is where we take all the security issues, the inventory information, all the business intelligence, all the analytics that we've done, and we boil that down to a number to tell you how your risk, what your risk exposure is for any particular business unit or the entire organization. Next, when you click through from the global view, you land on our regional view. In the regional view, here we've gone in and looked at an individual department, or we're looking at an individual region, and we're seeing the same types of information for that department or region. Finally, when you click through from the regional view, you get to the details view. And the details view is where you have all the raw details about this environment. So here is where you have the individual shares, the individual databases, if you're talking about structured data, and who those individual owners are, and other metrics around those individual assets that then roll up into the regional and ultimately the global view. So if you think about it, the global view is the executive view. What's going on for my entire organization? The regional view is what we call our management view. What's going on for the part of the organization that I manage? And finally, the detailed view is the engineer view. What are the individual issues that an engineer needs to address in order to fix the other views? So I'd like to jump into the demo. I will say that I'm focused primarily on ownership today. If you would like to have a full demo of SphereBoard and see all the a full explanation of everything that I'm going to show you today, I would encourage you to reach out to us. We can schedule a demo for you and go a little more in depth in all the features and functionality of SphereBoard. So this is our landing page, and SphereBoard is modular. Each module represents a particular data asset that you want to manage. Today we're going to talk about our governance of files and folders module, which is our module that we use for unstructured data or for managing unstructured data. So I'm going to go ahead and click into that. And you'll notice that the first thing that will come up is the global stats and inventory cards. Again, what do you have? In the global stats, we're telling you this is what you have in the entire organization. Total number of servers, collections, shares, folders, files. What does the entire organization have? As we scroll down to the inventory card, this is where things start getting interesting, and this is where ownership starts coming into play. Notice that we've broken down this entire mock organization into regions. So you'll have the APAC region, the New York region, the USN branches. One key thing that you're looking at here that I have to highlight is that you are not looking at the fact that New York, for example, has 4.7 million folders in the New York region, physically in the New York region. What you're looking at here is that people who own data in this organization, 4.7 million folders of that data is owned by people who are in the New York region. The data physically could sit anywhere in the world, but we've determined the owner of that data, and based on that ownership, we've assigned that data to people that happen to be in the New York region. So that's a very different way of looking at inventory information. Typically, infrastructure groups think about think about what server is the data on, what business unit owns an individual server, or what data center is the data on. But that's not how business people look at this data. The users of the data think about what does equities own, what does human resources own. They think about not where the data physically is, but where a department or a particular region might actually own, the users of that department or region own that data. Real quick, I'll jump down to our security card. Again, pivoted on region, we're looking at the individual owners of the data and the amount of issues associated with that particular region. Then we go into our sensitive data card. This is where we talk about where there's sensitive data in the organization. Again, pivoted on region here and showing you the amount of unprotected sensitive data. Our stale card, where we talk about stale data in the organization. Again, not looking at an individual server and seeing stale data, but how much a particular business unit or region owns of, has how much stale data that particular region has. And then finally, the risk rating, a single number that represents the overall risk for each of these business units, showing, boiling everything down that we've seen up until now into that single number. So I want to go back up and drill into the inventory, and we want to go into New York because that seems to be the headquarters in this organization, and we want to now look at inventory information for the New York region. We're now in that management mid view that I talked about in the slides. And notice that we've switched now. Now we're not looking at region, we're now looking at business units for the New York region. Because maybe in the New York region, the way that they manage that region is there's a manager assigned to each or an audit person assigned to each of the business units. So notice how we can switch and we can pivot on whatever metric is meaningful to the customer that we've built this for. And you'll see that for example, the IT business unit has the most data. Banking is the next highest. So we're looking at this data again in the context of who are the owners behind the data, regardless of where the data is, who are the owners behind it, and then lumping that data set into under that business unit. The next thing I want to show is our filer breakdown, which looks more like a traditional inventory type metric where you see the servers and the amount of data that's on the servers. But the thing to highlight here is that you're not, in fact, looking at this server and seeing that there's 512,000 folders. What we're saying is on this server, 512,000 folders are owned by the New York region, which again is a completely different way of looking at inventory data in the context of individuals, of human beings behind the data, not necessarily bits on a hard drive. So next, what I want to do is drill into and get to the detail level that I spoke about. So I'll click into human resources because human resources tends to be a department that exists in most organizations. And you'll see that now we've gone down to our detail view. We're seeing individual shares, we're seeing individual collections, we're seeing owners of those shares, employee ID, or any other HR information that you might find meaningful. You're also seeing some of the security issues, a risk rating. So here is where we're giving the individual engineer enough information where they could take action and start correcting some of these issues. Again, after you've of course received approval from the application owner, but you also have the application owner here, so you know exactly who you need to talk to in order to resolve some of these issues. One of the things I want to highlight is these icons that are next to each owner. If you click on the icon, we have our little pop-out chart here that kind of describes exactly how we determine this owner. So if you recall, I said we use a multi-tier approach. We use several methods. In this example, we're seeing some of the methods that were used to determine ownership, and we explain exactly what that method is, how it was used, and why, and give some explanation to the owner as to why they've been assigned ownership of this asset. Where appropriate and where there's information, you'll notice that some of the names are links. We actually provide some level of evidence on why they're the owner. So for example, majority manager, we see that all these people report to the person, and because they report to that individual and they have access to the data, that individual's been assigned ownership to the data. So as you can see, from the detailed view where we found the individual owners, we then use information about those owners, the additional fields that we bring in from all the data sets that we bring in from an organization, to then pivot the regional view, and then ultimately pivot the global view. How those pivots happen really depends on what's important to the organization and how the organization manages their environment. But ownership, at this level, is what drives what you see in the second and the third level. This is the most important part that determines how those other views are structured. And really, those views are what a business person, what an audit person, what a non-infrastructure person really cares about, even a security person. Because risk, a key component of risk is not just the data and who has access, but who those people are, more information about who has access. It's not just about looking at an individual account that has access or an individual account that owns it, but is that person someone who is in a front office group that's super critical, or someone that's in a back office team that's managing some critical piece of, or some sensitive data, some sensitive customer data. That's very important and a big distinction, and your risk rating must reflect that. And that's what we do, and that's why everything that we do, it's always about ownership, and ownership is the core of Sphere Board. So what I'd like to do now is just go quickly, give a quick conclusion. So again, as you saw, ownership is one of the most important components of a data governance security program, especially when it comes to unstructured data. You have to determine ownership before you can move on to probably the next most important thing you can do in a security program, which is take corrective action. No single method is perfect. You need multiple methods, and those multiple methods, the order of those methods and how those methods are executed depends on your organization, it depends on your industry, it depends on the size of your organization, and it depends on how you manage your organization. All of these things come into play when it comes to determining ownership, and this is what we do. When we go into an organization, we determine what are the best methods, what are the best order of these methods, and then we execute. And finally, ownership is at the very core. As you saw, we started from the executive view and we drilled down to the detailed view, but the detailed view is really what drives the executive view. That detailed view, those individual owners, is what drives everything we show from that point on. Everything we show at the managerial view, and ultimately what we show you at the global view to see an executive view of the entire organization.
Rosario, thank you very much for that fascinating presentation and demonstration of Sphere Board as it relates to data ownership. We have a few questions coming in, and we have a brief couple minutes for them. So one question that's coming in centers around the platforms that Sphere Board can integrate with. Basically, there's some people that are looking at specific data sources that could provide an additional single pane of view to the single pane of glass. Can you elaborate on some of the platforms that SphereWord can integrate with to help determine this data ownership?
Sure. So the data, our partners, as well as some of the other products that we work with, that we integrate with, are key to driving ownership and driving most of what I talked about. So definitely we integrate with HR systems, things like PeopleSoft and SAP and some of those other well-known HR systems. We need some basic information about the human beings in your organization, not just accounts. So that's key. But we also integrate with things like request systems and CMDBs and ServiceNow and SailPoint. These are the systems where we bring in any kind of information that we can leverage to help identify ownership, as well as do some of the other analysis that we do. So there's a wide variety of systems. Just to rattle off some of our partners like Varonis, like SailPoint, like ServiceNow. Those are Quest. Those are all key partners that we use and we leverage. But we also can, and Splunk, almost forgot Splunk. We also leverage internally developed tools. So a lot of times we'll go into an organization and they'll say, that's great, you integrate with all these other things, but our HR system is based on some internally developed tool and the data is in some database or an XML or JSON file. We can use that as well. So we can build connectors that can connect to your custom built solutions so that we can bring that data if it's valid and usable for us.
Okay, we have a couple more minutes, so there's a couple more questions coming in. This one is from an individual that works for a financial services company. This individual claims that he has issues in identifying who owns certain data assets at his organization. So he'd like to know, how can SphereWord help him gain control of this information through the reports that you've outlined?
Yeah, that's a great question because, and the reason for this webinar was really to go through ownership and talk about ownership. Ownership is actually very, very difficult to do. And there is, as we said, there is no single solution that can be used to determine ownership. When we go into an organization, while our tool, we have our tool that we could deploy, our algorithms, our metrics, our ways of determining ownership is very much custom to the client because, as I said, we have to pick the right order. So what I would say is, for an organization that's struggling with ownership, what we see is that when organizations struggle with ownership, they're using a single method. And they've been told that this is the right method to use, either by a third-party product or by, internal IT is using this method because they think that's the right method. And what we've discovered is there is no single method. Use multiple methods. Try to find as many as you can, but more importantly than finding all these methods is putting them in the right order. Putting them in the right order so that you know that you could work your way and whittle your way down so that every single piece of data asset is assigned a proper owner.
Great explanation. Great explanation. Great. With that said, we are out of time. That concludes our webinar for today. I'd like to thank our featured speaker, Rosario Mastrogiacomo, Director of Architecture Design, for delivering a great presentation today. We'll be posting this replay of this webinar on our website at www.sphereco.com shortly. Thank you, and I hope you all have a great morning or a great afternoon. Take care. Bye for now.